Rosal Rahman, Marilyn Percy, Martha Flores Vasquez, and then Jose Garcias.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Russell Rahman. I'm the tenant of Rent Stabilized Building Apartment, and I'm senior community organizer at Chaya CDC. First, I'm going to talk about my tenant's experience. So I was moved in the United States 2006. First 6 years, I was living in private houses in different parts of Queens. I never had experience increasing rent. I paid on time. The landlord was very generous to me, and I feel like maybe that's the best way living in private house. But there are other benefits that private house doesn't have. So I was desperate when my wife came in 2013. I was desperate getting apartment in rent stabilized building, and I got, I think, a good deal in terms of the market rate, $1,300 one bedroom apartment in Jackson Heights. But within 2 years, now my rent is increased more than 13%. Now the rent is $1,477. And my income has increased less than 3%. So you can imagine, or I don't know if you have that imaginary capacity, because last year we were very disappointed by your decision that it didn't give us rollback or 0%. We got 1%, which is still a high increase for us because of the last few years. That because of the high increases, almost every rent stabilized building apartments legal rent is more, maybe it's $1,800, $1,700 in Queens, and now people are facing this problem because they are seeing within last 1 year now I'm talking about from my tenant organizing experience, the people we've seen. They are facing that they used to get pay $1,300, $1,400 within 1 year. Now they're to pay for $200 extra because of that. They used to receiving rent preferential rent, not the legal rent. So landlord have many ways to increase their rent. MCI is one big way, and vacancy bonus, taking opportunity of vacancy bonus every time we see. They are harassing tenant, and they are creating the situation people had to move, and then they increase the rent. So that's the only way for tenant. I urge you, if you can increase our income, you are making decision for homeowner, you are increasing their income. They are doing business. But for us, it's not, we're not helping us increase our income, and if your decision is high increase, that we're in trouble. So please do rollback, not even 0%. Thank you.
Thank you. Marilyn Percy, then Martha Flores Vasquez, Jose Garcias, and Kenny Schaefer.
Chair, I think we also, there's maybe some seats. I know that people, if there are seats.
If you have an open seat next to you, if you can raise your hand, please. So any hands up, those are seats.
Hay asientos abiertos. Si la gente tiene la mano hacia arriba, hay un asiento abierto, so se pueden sentar ahí.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Marilyn Percy. I'm a small property owner in Sunset Park. I have 6 units, rented stabilized. I have one tenant that lived there for 45 years. He's only paid $650. I have another one that inherited the apartment from her aunt, 30 years. She only paid $900, and another one, she's been living there for 24 years. She paid $775, and the other 3, they coming and going. Last month, the 30, my 4-year-old tenant moved out, who destroyed the apartment. I have made that apartment livable, actually not livable, new, for him to move, for me to increase the rent, and he destroyed even the bathtub. He took a hammer and he destroyed it, okay? So every year, the insurance go up, the taxes go up, the water go up, everything go up. Okay, I understand there is a lot of landlords that they have many buildings, many apartments, a small property owner, we got SIP. Tenant, they can apply for a script, or they can apply for Section A, and those people of Section A, forget about it. My brother have a house in the Bronx, and every time that he have a Section 8 tenant, they destroy the apartment. So I urge you for a rent increase more than 3 and 5% a year. Thank you.
Martha Flores Vasquez.
Good evening, everybody. I was compelled to come here today because not only am I an elected district leader in the 40th Assembly District,
I'm sorry.
where
Welcome.
thank you. I represent many tenants. I represent shareholders, landlords, homeowners. I mean, you name it. But today I'm here as a rent-stabilized tenant for 36 years, and I hear both sides, the landlord, the tenant. But the bottom line here is that when you've taken the responsibility to own a building and to manage a building and to rent apartments, you have a responsibility. And what I'm hearing in my community is that all the rent-stabilized tenants are not receiving the repairs that they should be getting. The buildings are in poor conditions. But good management starts with good supervision. And I can also tell you that as the director, because I wear many hats, I'm the director of Community Prevention Alternatives for Families in Crises, that through that agency, I have a hat where I'm helping families in crises. And my entire district, I receive phone calls today, and no one should live in fear. We have a lot of families living in fear. We have people telling me, when you leave that hearing, please come back and call me and tell me what happened. I think there's a lot of politics. I think that we need to set aside politics to really provide provision of services. And when we're talking about provision of services, if we deregularize rent stabilization and if we keep increasing the rent on families that are barely making it on a monthly basis, where are they going to go? I mean, we're going to have a homeless population in New York City, or we're going to have no diversity in New York City, because diversity is about representing and supporting everyone across the board. So I am asking you, as an honorable district leader, as an honorable elected in a community that helps all the boroughs, because I don't just help Flushing, Queens, I help everyone through my agency, Community Prevention Alternatives, is that you consider rolling back some of these increases, if anything, because as a rent-stabilized tenant, I work with my landlord, and sometimes I make my own repairs, and I show respect and consideration, and I don't think anyone should be destroying somebody else's property, especially if you want to live there. But I think there needs to be a collaborative effort, and there needs to be a lot of sensitivity for families in crisis. So thank you, and it's an honor to be here, and I hope that the voice of many has been heard through me. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony.
Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon.
Yo vengo en nombre de los dueños de casa para sacar la cara por ellos, porque todos creen que somos malos. Vengo a hablar en español porque mi inglés es muy pobre.
So I'm here representing owners. I'm here to speak up for them because everyone says that we are bad people, and I need an interpreter because of my poor English.
Bueno, como repito nuevamente, yo vengo los dueños de casa. No todos somos malos, no todos aprovechamos de los inquilinos. A veces cuando el dueño de casa es bueno, aprovechan de uno. Porque yo tengo una familia un edificio de 6 familias en Woodside, y todos los inquilinos son 5 que me dan dolor de cabeza. La única inquilina que es dominicana, la única es correcta.
So I'm here to say that not all property owners are bad people. Most of us are actually very good people. In my case, I own a 6-property unit. 5 of them are quite a headache, especially one of the Dominican tenants.
Ahora quisiera que me den los...
I'm sorry you had to translate that.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's a correct translation.
No. He said
So,
only the Dominican person didn't bother.
Right. And there was also he was talking about...
Ah, bueno, que más despacio y no tan rápido.
Por frase,
Ok.
perdón.
Bueno, yo no sé qué es lo que quiere que les repita, pero
Sí, siga.
con lo que les digo es que los inquilinos que yo tengo no tienen disciplina y no ganan bien. Entonces, ¿qué culpa tenemos los dueños de casa? Lo que deberían dar ellos reclamar a los padres que nos los mandaron a la escuela y se calificaron para coger un trabajo un poquito más remunerado. Entonces, es como yo, me gano un dinero, no puedo comprar un Rolls Royce. Yo tengo que coger el bus, tengo que coger para ir al trabajo. Ellos quieren coger un Rolls Royce sin haber ido al trabajo, sin haber trabajado y no haber ganado lo suficiente.
So there's not much I can do. Many of these people aren't disciplined. They may not have the economic support and background. Many of them, maybe their parents didn't send them to school. They don't have the education. It's like as if I wanted to buy a Rolls Royce and I can't afford it, so why would I do that?
Aparte de eso, no son disciplinados. Ellos se les dice que no deben tener nada en los pasillos y lo tienen todo lleno para que fuese un closet en lugar de ser un pasillo. ¿Bien? Entonces eso no me conviene a mí, yo no sé qué hacer. Yo no sé qué hacer. ¿Qué me pueden recomendar los que representan a los inquilinos?
Also, they're not very disciplined. They leave things in the alleys, on the sidewalks. It's like they're having everything in a closet. I don't know what to do anymore. Please recommend something for me to do.
Cuando cambio, perdón, por eso me puede dar un poquito más de tiempo. Cuando se cambian los inquilinos, yo nunca les subo la renta que me da permiso a la ciudad de un 18 a un 20%. Nunca les ayudo, nunca les subo, porque yo soy consciente de que son pobres y no les subo. Ahora, si usted me da permiso, los que representan a los miembros a los inquilinos, les puedo subir la renta porque a nadie les subo. De acuerdo a eso, yo soy hispano y me gusta el hispano. Trato de ayudarlo y nunca le subo. Le subo lo que me dan, el 1%, que es ridículo, el 1,75% a 2 años, lo ridículo. Pero lo subo eso, pero no lo que yo debo subir. La ciudad me da permiso.
So when my tenants change, I never increase their rent. I don't increase the 18 or 20%. I recognize that they're poor people. If I were to have that permission from the board here representing tenants, I would increase the rent very, very little, maybe 1%. I understand their economic condition, so it's not like I want to do it. I would only do it if it was necessary.
Thank you so much, sir.
Al alcalde. Yo di el voto por alcalde porque yo soy demócrata. Pero en la actualidad, si él se va a reelegir, no cuente con mi voto. No lo doy por un republicano. Gracias.
Gracias.
And in terms of the mayor, I've supported him because I am a Democrat. But if he wants to be reelected, he shouldn't count on my vote unless things change. I'll have to vote Republican.
Gracias.
Thank you for your testimony. Kenny Schaefer, Steve Goldman, Eduardo Barahona.
Good evening. My name is Kenny Schaefer. I am Vice Chair of the Metropolitan Council on Housing. I'm also a rent-stabilized tenant, and I work across the street as a housing attorney with the Legal Aid Society. The first thing I want to talk about is the purpose of the Rent Guidelines Board, because there still amazingly seems to be a great deal of confusion. The Rent Stabilization Association testifies that this board is charged with assessing and passing through cost increases for the prior year. That's your job. Really? Look at the rent stabilization law. I know you all took an oath, and I ask you to read it again before you vote next Wednesday, because the purpose of the rent stabilization law, which creates the Rent Guidelines Board, it says action is necessary in order to prevent exactions of unjust, unreasonable, and oppressive rents. The purpose of the Rent Guidelines Board and the Rent Stabilization Law is to protect tenants from unaffordable rents. It hasn't been happening. Yes, Section 510 of the law says that you should look at the health of the real estate industry and everything else. Fine, take a look at the health of the real estate industry and then get back to your job of protecting tenants from unaffordable rents. How is the real estate industry doing? You don't have to look very far. Page 1 of the 2015 Income and Expense Study, the very first sentence, what's new? Landlords' profits are up for the 9th consecutive year, in bold letters, 9th. They're at record levels, and landlords' profits are up 34% over the years, even adjusted for inflation, which is really double dipping. Ms. Wagner's testimony was illustrative because she, even though she has 4 out of 6 tenants paying under $800, when she applied for hardship increase, she wasn't eligible because the legal profit margin is about 7%. It's not 10%, 30%, and it's certainly not 40%. Look, so there's a cartoon from the New Yorker, a bunch of fat cats sitting around the club. I'll start thinking outside the box when the box is empty. Well, for landlords, the box isn't empty, it's overflowing. For tenants, the box is empty. Look at how tenants are doing. You know how they're doing. You've heard the testimony. You know your study. Rent burdens are up 36.4%, 60,000 homeless people. It's time to roll back rents. We're calling for a rollback of 5 to 10%. Freezing rents will keep a horrible situation in place. This job, you know, I know, I've talked to some of you, you know the history of the unwarranted rent increases. Even if your job was to protect landlord profits, you've done it, not you, but your predecessors have done it too well. It's time to undo that. We've been going in the wrong direction too long. The evidence is all around us. It's time to roll back rents. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Steve Goldman, Eduardo Barahona, Jack Freund, and Young Rakim.
I suspect that you, sir, have never taken money out of your pocket to invest in something for other people, but that's a different story. We'll talk about it another time.
Let's try to keep our testimony directed at us and not toward each other.
I think it's wrong to make a decision.
Sir, can you talk into the microphone, sir?
I think it's wrong to make an important decision that's in front of this board based on anecdotal stories by either landlords or tenants. I think the question should be, do tenants deserve protection from unreasonable increases? And if the answer is yes, which may be a reasonable position to take, and I as a landlord am not against it, then the next question is, who should pay for the de facto subsidy given to the tenant? According to New York State and New York City's rules, the answer is the landlord. According to this board, the answer is the landlord. Because if I, as a landlord, am the only one who's prevented from charging market rent or some other reasonable rent that I think is correct, then I am the only one subsidizing that regulated rent. I submit to you that if we as a society believe that rent should be subsidized, it should be shared by everyone, all the citizens of New York City, and that includes the members of this board. One way to do this is to apply a general tax. I read that the goal of the RGB is a 0 to 1% increase, and I'd like to present you with a reasonable, realistic scenario. A regulated apartment that pays $800 a month for an apartment whose market value is $1,800 a month, at 1% annual increases will take over 80 years to get to today's market rent. At 3% increases annually, it will take 28 years to reach today's market rent. That means that these regulated rents will never, ever even approach market rents. You don't think that that's enough protection? I think it's plenty of protection. And finally, I'd like to submit that taxes and water, which are determined by the city, keep rising, as well as insurance and utilities costs. It's absurd to consider rent increases that are lower than the cost increases. And I hope this board will take it into consideration.
Thank you for your testimony.
So can I ask a quick question, Chair? I understand you're saying that landlords have increased expenses. Are you in favor of landlords opening up their books so people can look at their books to determine what the actual costs are for landlords? Then, if you think you are subsidizing,
first of all, I'm not against it. Secondly, this is a really diversionary tactic. It's populist. It's easy to make an impression on people. Hey, let them open the books. I'll tell you what. You give us the same opportunity that you give anybody else that makes an investment out of their own pocket, their own risk. I started by saying that we shouldn't consider anecdotal stories. But my anecdotal story is that out of 30 years that I'm in this business, the first 25 years, it was not unusual for me to work 70-hour weeks. You see, I didn't get dressed up like this for your benefit. This is how I get dressed every day. Because I'm a hands-on landlord, I get involved in repairs, I get involved in maintenance, I have a small crew of 3 people working for me, and I've worked for 70-hour weeks for 25 years until I got to this point in my life. The last 5 years, I'm doing well. Thank God I'm doing well. It's not your position to tell me how much I should earn on my investment, not yours.
But you're asking for subsidies. You're asking that the taxpayers subsidize landlords because rent stabilization protects affordable housing. I was just asking you if you felt like the way to do that is to open up books and records to ensure that the landlords who aren't doing well, there's subsidies available. For the landlords who are doing well, we should look at that information. That's what you're asking, and it sounds like you think that's a good idea, which I'm glad we agree on.
How do you compensate somebody like me that for 25 years worked at a salary which I guarantee you is less than any one of you sitting behind this table? In the last 5 years, I will be the first here to admit I'm doing well, and I'm happy that I am, but I paid my dues. Why would you take that away from me? Divide what I'm doing now by the last 25 or 30 years of work. It's not all that much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
And actually, I just wanted to make a quick statement. The open the books comment that Harvey...
Mr. Goldman?
Yeah, I have one last statement. Harvey, I
apologize. I'm sorry.
That's okay, and I really appreciate your testimony. And I mean, this is a really important message. The open the books comment, for me, same reciprocity. If you're talking about opening the books, which the RPIE process does open the books, the same thing could be said about means testing of the tenants. You're not talking about that, Harvey. You're not asking that question. So I just wanted to make that point. Have you had experience? What kind of experiences have you had in terms of your operating expenses increasing in the last, say, 10 years in which you've operated this building?
You know, because of the RPIEs and because of the reports that I do give, I've had certain buildings that my taxes have doubled in less than 8 years. Okay, one fairly large building that I have, not residential, commercial, but nevertheless, used to pay around $50,000 a year in taxes. This year it's $103,000. I have residential tenants, buildings, in which I've made substantial investments in order to improve them. The reward that I get is for somebody to say, oh, Mr. Goldman is making a little too much money, let's increase their taxes. And I'm not talking about 5%. I'm talking about buildings that went from $40,000 to $70,000 in a matter of just a few years. And my biggest complaint is that the city is the biggest culprit in my increases in the cost of operating the business. And going back to the question of opening books, I know for a fact that I have tenants that can well afford more than the $700 or $800 a month that they're paying. And the protection is not intended for people that can afford it. It's intended for people that can't.
Thank you for your testimony. Eduardo Barahona? Eduardo Barahona?
Yes, this is me. My name is Eduardo Barahona from Centro Hispano Cuscatlán, and I have been an organizer for 20 years. I've been seeing how families struggle to pay the rent, including me. And one of the statements in a petition I want to make today is that I remember that from 20 years ago, the rezoning all over the New York City has been happening in Queens, Bronx, in Brooklyn, in Staten Island. And the rezoning bring only an incentive. They say that it is for, making good improving on the commercial and business and everything, but bring also an incentive to landlords to increase the rent and to harass tenants, overcharge tenants, use the 160th regulation, use the vacancy allowance to increase the rent. And and tenants don't have too many opportunities to defend themselves, to try to stop those rent increases. The only opportunity that maybe is good is the RGB. And the RGB has been, the Mayor de Blasio started last year trying to compensate those rent increases from the past year from the Bloomberg administration, trying to compensate that. And now we hope that the RGB will compensate those, trying to have a reduction on the rent of 0%. That's por falta of the tenant, because tenants are being suffering so much on the rent increasing from 20, 30 years. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Jack Freund, Yang Rakim, Miley Wong, and then Ki Young Kim.
This back in there. Thank you, members of the board. We're submitting to you today the Rent Stabilization Association's comments on the preliminary guidelines. I hope you'll have an opportunity to take a look at it before your final vote. I've talked previously about this notion of balancing the equities, which is assumed to be the function of the board. We don't believe that. There is nothing about the rent increases that have historically been granted by this board that are unjust or unreasonable exactions. 3% increase historically has been below the level or half the level of the increase in operating costs. And we've talked about, last time I've talked about the profitability portion of this equation versus the affordability portion. I've pointed out that you really don't know anything about profitability, and not that you just don't have the data to gauge profitability, and you certainly don't have the information or the ability to impose guidelines across the whole range of different housing types and so on based on profitability. So let me just address the other portion of this equation, which is affordability. And I submitted last week to you an analysis by the Citizens Budget Commission, which found that the issue of affordability is not one of rents, but one of incomes. It is the case that there is a direct relationship between rent burdens and income. The higher your income, the less your rent burden. So, and you've heard testimony today that the problem here is simply that incomes are not keeping up with rents. You cannot place that burden on property owners. There are other ways to address those issues, but placing that problem of affordability on property owners will simply result in, as some owner testimony has pointed out, in the deterioration of housing and the inability of owners to provide the services that they want to provide. Now, let me just say that this balancing concept, one of the worst things about that is the antipathy that it creates between owners and tenants, and it creates settings like this where people who generally get along very well, providing services, paying for services, are placed into this really untenable position. Thank you very much again for your attention.
Thank you.
Hi, Jack. Can you just explain a little bit about the cause and effect relationship you see with what's going on in Albany and how that affects, this is obviously just one piece of the rent puzzle.
Yeah. Thank you, Scott. It's really an important issue because I think we've made the case. This board has not overcompensated owners. Owners do have other sources of income that are authorized by Albany, not by this board, such as vacancy allowance, rent increases for improvements, and so on. Those, according to the data that you already have before you, have been decreasing. There's been less units deregulated. That's dropped in half. MCIs, as of the last year, have also been cut in half. So these other sources of income have already been reduced. And what is going on in Albany today, and probably over the next few days, is tremendous pressure from the mayor, the state assembly, and the governor to further restrict sources of income into the housing stock by eliminating vacancy allowances, eliminating these other sources of income. So what happens to the housing stock? Okay, you're set to do a zero or a near zero rent increase on the local level. Albany is set to cut back other sources of income that have compensated owners for the lack of income coming from the Rent Guidelines Board. So we really face, nobody knows what's going to happen in Albany. I'm not going to predict it. But it doesn't look good. Okay? So it makes it even more important that this Rent Guidelines Board come to the right decision this year. And you unfortunately have already very much limited the range of options you have. So we ask you to bear that in mind and go the distance. The one thing I do want to mention that has been mentioned here again, and we mentioned in our submission and comments, is a low rent adjustment. There are just a lot of rents that are too low, they're uneconomic. There has to be an adjustment of those. We need to get income into the housing stock in any way we can without doing damage. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your testimony. Young Run Kim, Miley Wong, and then Ki Young Kim.
안녕하세요. 제 이름은 김영란이고 저는 민권센터 세입자 모임 멤버입니다. 저는 지금 플러싱에 3년째 살고 있습니다. 저는 공공의 혜택을 받고 있으며 연소득의 80%를 임대료를 지불하는데 사용하고 있습니다. 지난 몇 년 동안 임대료가 올라가는데 연소득은 줄어들었습니다. 이번 연도에 임대료가 인상되면 생활의 질이 낮아질 것입니다. 이번 연도는 임대료를 하향 조정해야 한다고 생각합니다. 집값이 줄어들면 살아가는 데 필요한 음식, 옷, 의료비, 문화비를 내는데 훨씬 도움이 될 것입니다. 퀸즈 세입자분들이 집값 걱정을 덜해도 되고 더욱더 행복한 삶을 살 수 있습니다. 저소득 세입자를 위해 임대료 하향 조정이 무엇보다도 더 절대적으로 필요합니다.
Hi, my name is Youngran Kim, and I'm with the Mingkwan Center for Community Action, and I've been living in Flushing for 3 years. I'm currently living on public benefits, and I spend more than 80% of my income paying the rent. In the past years, the income has not been proportionately been risen to unfair rent hikes, and I worry about my quality of life and my husband, who's disabled right now, every day. Every month, I don't know if I could pay my rent. So I'm so sick and tired of worrying about paying the rent and meeting the rent. And after paying 80% of my income on rent, I worry about my quality of life, that I cannot spend my money on food or clothes or medical expenses or even any recreational activities I want to do as a senior. This is why I want to call for rent rollback for the quality of lives for Queens tenants and rent-stabilized apartments. Thank you.
Thank you. Miley Wong, Ki Young Kim, Sue Liwa.
I know you have a very difficult and important decision to make, so I thank you for taking the time to listen to us.
Can you speak into the microphone to make sure we can hear you? Thank you.
I'm here to talk to you about the plight of the mom-and-pop homeowners. We own many of the affordable apartments that we hear so much about. Many of our apartment rentals are below market value. This is because we don't have the resources that many of the larger developers have to bring it to market value. We have tenants that we have good, personal, long-term relationships with. We're not here to gouge our tenants, but we need to be able to afford to keep our investments. You know, every time I take out my checkbook, and next month it's the very huge real estate bill. You know, as a matter of fact, I'm scared to open that envelope because I know it's a big one. And I know whether it's my tax, my insurance, my gas bill, it's always more than the last payment. It's more than what I expect and more than I could afford to pay. Does this sound familiar to everyone? We don't have any government assistance to help us meet our always increasing expenses, so I'm asking you for a fair and reasonable rent increase this year. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Ki Young Kim, Sue Liwa, and Catherine Amanan Fernandez.
안녕하세요. 제 이름은 김기정이고 저는 민권센터 세입자 모임 멤버입니다. 저는 지금 잭슨하이츠에 30년째 살고 있습니다. 저는 SS를 받고 있으며 연소득의 60%를 임대료를 지불하는 데 사용하고 있습니다. 퀸즈에서는 저와 같이 많은 사람들이 높은 임대료 때문에 힘들어하고 있습니다. 이번 연도에 임대료가 인상되면 집값을 내기가 힘들어서 거처를 잃을 수도 있습니다. 지난 몇 년간 임대료가 인상됐던 것이 정당하지 않다고 생각합니다. 지난 공공 혜택이랑 연소득은 줄어드는데 살아가는 비용은 계속 올라갔기 때문입니다. 이번 연도는 임대료 하향 조정을 해야 한다고 생각합니다. 집값이 줄어들면 살아가는 데 필수적인 음식, 옷, 의료비를 내는데 훨씬 도움이 될 수 있습니다. 요컨대 저소득층 세입자를 위해 임대료 하향 조정이 무엇보다 더 절대적으로 필요합니다.
Hi, my name is Kijang Kim, and I'm also a community member at the Minkwon Center for Community Action, and I've been living in Jackson Heights for 30 years. I'm also on public benefits, and I spend more than 60% of my income on paying the rent. In Queens, my story is not unique. Many tenants in Queens in rent-stabilized apartments actually suffer a lot from paying lots of rent, and if we could allow another rent increase this year, many tenants, including myself, could jeopardize in losing our homes because we cannot simply afford our rent. In the past years, there's been a rent hikes unjustly disproportionate to our income or public benefit increases, and the cost of the living has been up. So therefore, I cannot make my necessities such as buying food and clothing and also medical expenses. This is why we need to call for a rent rollback for the low-income tenants in Queens. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony.
Hi, good evening. My name is Catherine Fernandez, and I am living in Jackson Heights last 5 years. But every year he raised $50. This year he said that he is going to raise $75. So our income is not enough. We are 50% we are giving in a rent. So how we will survive? Every time we think with this, we sleep with this worry that how we will survive. If all income is going in a rent, I want to show something. If you are all of them with your permission.
If you would like to give this to us so we can keep it, that would be fine, but I want to make sure everyone can hear you, so do you want to go back to the microphone? Would you like us to keep this?
Yes.
Do you have a copy?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you so much. I have this.
Thank you for your testimony. Sue Liwa.
Hi. Can everybody hear?
Yeah.
Okay. My parents have owned a small 6-family property for over 30 years. Our tenants have been with us for a while, and I'd like to say that we have a very good and respectful relationship. Many of us do not own numerous large multifamily buildings who can benefit from economies of scale as well as the ability to hire companies to manage our property. When there is a problem, in many instances, we work to fix these ourselves so that we can keep the costs down for us as well as our tenants. We unclog sewer drains, fix backed up toilets and tubs, handle garbage collection, shovel snow, fix leaking pipes, replace faucets. The list goes on and on. With no end in sight to the perpetual increase in the costs, as well as the stress of maintaining a property, a 0% or rollback would not be sustainable to small property owners. If I approached New York City Finance, the DEP, the insurance, gas, electric companies, and demanded a rollback or zero increase, I would be soundly rejected. What message would a zero or rollback send to current and potential future investors? I am not asking for a monumental increase, but a reasonable one, so that we feel our efforts are recognized and appreciated. At the end of the day, we are all in the same boat, struggling to pay bills and earn a living. Without tenants, property owners would not be able to keep their property. Without property owners, tenants would not have affordable housing. So we are interdependent on each other. I hope that my testimony today will have some weight on your decision, and I thank you for taking the time to listen to both sides on this important decision.
Thank you very much for your testimony.